long time ago, in the northern lands of Japan, there were two hard-working lumberjacks. They lived in a rural village and served their community by travelling across the river via a small crossing boat each day and gathering lumber to keep people warm. In those days, conflict and bandits were rife, and bridges were rare for defensive reasons. Nevertheless, people went about their daily business and lived fulfilling lives. Each person had their functions and contributions within the community. The functions of these two men, the aged Masaku and the young Minokichi, were to gather the lumber for the village, and that's just what they did, tirelessly each day. Masaku was an aged man with great skill and finesse with his axe and abilities to source decent lumber. Minokichi was his loyal apprentice who worked tirelessly too. One day in early winter, the men set off on their journey. As always, they asked the boatkeeper to cross them over the wide expanse of the river to the forest. They rambled through the cold forest, seeking an area of the forest they could lumber without damaging the ecosystem. Eventually, they found a great spot to begin work, when suddenly a dark cloud shadowed overhead. Next came cascading snow, which quickly turned into a fast-flowing snowstorm. The snow piled up at an alarming rate. The ice-cold environment was too much to bear, and so they set off back to the ferryman's post. When they arrived at the ferryman's boat, they could see the rushing ice-cold river with the snow littered on the riverbed, but they could not see the ferryman. They had no choice but to take shelter in the ferryman's hut at the riverside. There was no fire prepared, and the lumber they had was covered in snow. There were two tatami mats laid on the floor. They had no choice but to try and sleep through the storm. As the cold drifted in, they fell asleep in worry for their lives, but they did not cower nor whimper. As the night got darker and the snow piled up, the young apprentice Minokichi had a plethora of dreams. In the midst of the night he woke up. He felt an ice-cold chill roll down his spine. He slowly turned over to glance at Masaku, whom he respected and venerated. When he noticed the door was wide open, he glanced around. Then, as the moonlight glistened through the open doorway, he noticed a figure of white floating above Masaku. He could not believe his eyes as he looked at the figure. He blinked and took care to wipe the snow from his brow, and the frost was dusted from his eyes. He cleared his vision, and what he saw overwhelmed him and gave him sleep paralysis. The floating aura of white was not snow, but in fact a woman. This entity was a woman with incredible, enchanting majesty and beauty. He looked on at her with amazement as she whirled around the hut above Masaku. Suddenly she was still, her kimono shimmering in the moonlight and her pale skin glistening. Then a mist of ice fell from her lips and rested on the face of Masaku. Masaku let out a faint sound of relief as his life force left his body. Although Minokichi was unable to move with the combination of the extreme cold and the sleep paralysis, he let out a shriek. The Snow Woman realized Masaku was awake, and so now the Snow Woman glided at a shocking speed and stopped with her face inches from his. Her eyes were like piercing lightning, yet within a matter of moments they softened. The Snow Woman glanced closer and closer at him, and noticed that Minokichi was excessively handsome. She looked deep into his eyes. They were windows to his gentle and loving spirit. In an instant she fell for him. She fell for him like the snow falls in a blizzard. hard, fast, and with dangerous levels of depth. The Lady of the Snow said, as she grasped his head with her ice-cold hands and leaned over his ear. She whispered, "I will save you tonight. Tell no one about this. If you tell anyone, you are a dead man." His eyes glazed, and his eyelids closed shut like the surface of a lake freezes in a sheet of ice. When he awoke, the snow was piled high against the hut. Mosaku was dead, and being a man with little superstition, he resigned the memory to a nightmare. He staggered out of the cabin to find the ferryman crossing over, and they dutifully carried the hard-working Mosaku's vessel to the boat and returned to the village in a solemn manner. 1 year later, he was returning to the village when he noticed a woman sobbing aside the riverbank. He tended to her tears and asked why she was filled with sorrow and fear. The woman went on to mention her situation. The woman's name was Oyuki, and her parents had passed away. She had travelled some distance already with the goal of reaching the capital, as there were no means for her to continue her life in the countryside. Minokichi expressed sympathy for the young woman. He offered Oyuki a place to rest in his home. They fell in love quickly, and within a matter of a decade they had 10 children. They both worked hard. Minokichi lumbered and Oyuki weaved. They had a powerful and beautiful romance that would warm the spirits of those in a snowstorm. One fateful night, the man was looking on at his beautiful and much-loved wife when he suddenly recalled his dream. He looked at her and said, "A long time ago, I met a woman who had your likeness, and she dropped icy mist upon Mosaku, the man who trained me. He perished on that night." The woman scowled and ran up to him and screeched, "I told you to never tell anyone about that. I will spare you this time. Care for our children with the love you showed me and be a great father to them. Sayonara." His wife, who he loved dearly, suddenly dispersed into an icy mist and drifted out of a high window into the night.